Hey there my wedding planning friends, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, thanks so much for clicking on my video. I'm Emily Summer. I am a wedding planner based in Montana, and I make weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice. Today we're going to tackle a topic that tends to be a lot more complicated than people anticipate, and that is all about wedding transportation. So there are a lot of different things to consider and moving parts when it comes to having transportation provided at your wedding. The first of which is determining whether providing transportation is something that is right for your wedding. I just want to point out that it is not a requirement to provide transportation for you or your guests, and it's also not something that is expected from your guests. So that being said, there are some things to consider to determine whether you should provide transportation at your wedding or not. Number one is the location of your wedding venue. Is it really far from town? Is it far from accommodations, from where your guests might be staying in hotels, or somewhere where Uber or Lyft or some kind of car service that they could get on their own is not readily accessible? Number two, are 70% or more of your guests traveling by plane? So that would mean traveling, if they're traveling across states and they're driving, then they're going to have their own vehicle, so that's not that big of a deal. If they're traveling by plane, they're likely not going to have their own means of transportation unless they plan on renting a car. Number three, does your guest list enjoy alcoholic beverages? Obviously, this goes for the end of the evening. If you have a lot of guests that you anticipate hitting the bar up all night and being there towards the late hours of the evening and not having a way to leave the premises because they have been drinking. Number four is, what is the parking situation like at your venue? Is parking pretty limited? Are you only allowed a certain number of cars up there? Is overnight parking restricted? If you answered yes to any or all of these questions, then hiring a transportation service is probably the right choice for you. Now, when it comes to hiring a transportation service, there are a few decisions that need to be made as far as who the transportation is for, your vehicle options, how many vehicles, how many hours, and how many trips. These are all the things that we'll tackle in this video, and let's first start with transportation specifically for you and your partner and or your bridal party. Having transportation provided for yourself and your partner as well as your bridal party is great for a few reasons. First, you won't have to worry about people running late or not getting to the venue on time, and also ensures that you will all arrive at the same time, especially if you are planning to meet your photographer for photos, or if you're meeting a hair and makeup artist at your venue to get ready. You guys will all arrive at the same time. You won't have to be touching base with all these multiple people to make sure that they are on their way to the venue. It's also great to just have that time to kind of all hang out together and have a little morning celebration before the real celebration happens, and it's also a good photo opportunity. And third, you won't have to worry about leaving your car overnight, and that goes for your bridal party as well, because you're likely going to be the individuals that are there towards the end of the evening, potentially even the last ones at the venue, and you won't have to worry about getting yourself a safe ride home. So when it comes to transportation options for yourself and or your bridal party, you have a couple different options. So you can of course hire a transportation company to provide a car, whether that's a limousine or a town car or maybe a shuttle or like a party bus situation. But since this is a smaller group, you also have the option of using a car service such as Uber or Lyft. You can You can schedule Ubers and Lyfts ahead of time, so if you do plan to go this route, definitely make sure that you're scheduling your vehicle ahead of time, especially if you're in a smaller town like here where there aren't that many vehicles readily available at all hours of the day. So that way you know for sure that you are having a vehicle to take you to your venue or wherever you need to be on the day of your wedding. And also make sure that you're planning ahead and scheduling ahead for timing. So even if you're completely ready and you're just needing transportation to get from maybe your house or wherever you're getting ready to the venue for photos or just to the venue for your wedding, even if you're completely ready, still plan to arrive at least 1 hour before your ceremony starts. This way you will not have to worry about maybe your Uber getting stuck in traffic to even get to you to pick you up, or stuck in traffic or road construction or an accident or whatever might happen on the way to the venue, so that you aren't worried about running behind or being late or crunched for time. Something to consider if you do plan on hiring transportation for yourself is what your responsibilities are at the end of the night. So if you have to have everything out of the venue and there's decor items, personal belongings, decorations, anything that you need out of the venue at the end of the night, keep that in mind, because if you're hiring a transportation company and hopping on a bus at the end of the night, or even a town car, an Uber, a Lyft, or whatever it may be, keep in mind that you might need to be bringing stuff with you, and that could be difficult if you're hiring just like an Uber, a Lyft, or a small car. You're probably only going to be able to bring a couple things with you. So if that's something that you are responsible for at the end of the night, either task that with somebody else and make sure that things that need to leave have somewhere to go and somebody that's in charge of that. Also have a bag packed for overnight. If you plan on staying somewhere other than your own home and your vehicle is taking you there, bring a bag that day, have it packed with everything that you'll need for overnight, and let somebody know about this bag, whether that's your coordinator or your mom or maid of honor or somebody that's going to be with you all day. Make sure that they are aware of the suitcase or whatever it may be that needs to leave with you at the end of the night so that it goes with whatever vehicle you are in at the end of the night. Okay, let's talk about transportation for your guests now, because this is where a lot of the planning has to happen. So you have the same options as you do for your bridal party, whether that's hiring a shuttle or a car. You probably won't hire limousines for your guests, but if you're bougie like that, go for it. You also can use Uber and Lyft services, but consider, like I said before, if you're in a smaller town, there might not be that many vehicles available. So if you're planning on just having your guests call their own Ubers to leave from the venue, if there's not a lot of options, or if there's something else going on in town and a lot of vehicles are in use, they might be really delayed getting to the venue, which means your guests might not be able to leave in time for you to be meeting the requirements of your venue as far as the time that you need to vacate the premise. So keep that in mind. Also consider cell service. If you, again, plan on having your guests call for their own taxi or car, Uber, Lyft, whatever it may be from the venue, make sure that there is decent cell reception at the venue so that they're not either missing a call from their Uber or even able to order an Uber in the first place. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty details of hiring a transportation service for your guests. So there's a lot of things to consider that a lot of people don't really realize when it comes to hiring and planning all of the transportation for your guests to and from your venue. So if you choose to go the route of hiring like a shuttle or buses, get a good idea for the amount of people that will be utilizing these services before you even reach out to transportation companies. So a lot of times you can do this just by looking over your guest list and knowing who will be traveling by plane, who you think might be getting their own vehicle. If people are traveling with their family and kids, they're probably going to rent a car, especially if they're making a little vacation out of it. So get a good idea of how many people you anticipate will be needing transportation services at your wedding, and then start reaching out to companies so that you can kind of go over this number with them. You can even offer like an option when guests RSVP, whether they would like to have a transportation service, whether that's to or from the wedding. That being said, I will say buses and shuttles work well for guest counts up to about 100 people. And this is because typically in one bus you can fit up to 50 people. After this number, it gets really tricky with timing unless you are having multiple buses or shuttles, because if you're having 50 people to a bus and you have about 100 people, that's just 2 trips right there. So when you have more than that, you're either going to need multiple trips, which means the first arrival of the shuttle or bus will have to be potentially hours before the ceremony. So then you have this group of people that have to arrive and be ready much further in advance than the rest of your guests. And also when that happens, a lot of people are not going to choose to get on that earlier bus if that's the case. So then you're stuck with maybe a handful of people that get on your early bus, and then everyone's trying to get on that last bus, and they're just not going to fit, and it's just not going to work. And your bus driver is going to end up having to take multiple trips towards the end, and you're going to get really pushed back in your timeline, and everyone's going to be arriving late. Something that might help with this is some transportation services charge by the number of vehicles and some charge by the number of hours or trips. So if it's an option for you, maybe just having a couple different buses rather than one bus with multiple trips might be a better option for you, so that you can just have a couple buses arrive around the same time prior to the ceremony, not have to schedule it out in like 30 to 45 minute shifts. If you are going to have multiple trips, you will want to communicate this with your guests beforehand and make sure that you have people that will be arriving on that early bus and they know who they are. And a great way to do this is to have all of your close family and maybe close friends, get on that earlier bus so that they're arriving early, and that way you can get some photos done beforehand. And that's a great way to get people on that first trip and then have enough room for everybody else to fit on the second one, and also knock out some photos before your ceremony. So if you do provide transportation to the wedding, you're going to need to provide transportation at the end of the night as well, because people won't have vehicles up there. So there is always an option to just provide transportation for the end of the night as well and not even have it to get people to the venue. That's fine. But make sure that you're communicating this with your guests, whether that's on your wedding website or just telling them in person that there will be transportation for the end of the night. So maybe carpooling with people so that they don't have to leave cars up there. On that note, make sure you're checking with your venue and understanding what their policies are as far as parking at the venue and overnight parking. If overnight parking is not allowed, then you will probably want to have transportation to and from, just to eliminate anybody not being able to, somebody driving to the venue and not being able to drive back home. So depending on the number of guests that will be needing transportation at the end of the night, you will typically have 2 to 3 shuttles and departure times at the end of the night. So you'll have one earlier in the evening, maybe say your party is going to go until 11 or 12 at night. You'll probably want to have your first one leave around 8:30 or 9, or whenever all of your kind of formal dances, cake cutting, toast, all that stuff is over, for anyone that wants to be leaving earlier in the night and not have to stay until the very end of the night. And then you'll usually have one maybe like an hour before the final end, and then the last bus, if you're having just 3, the last bus would be at the very end of the night to make sure everybody leaves. That being said, if you know that you have a lot of people on your guest list that are going to be sticking around until the bitter end of the dance party, then you might want to instead have 2 buses that come at the very end of the night and get rid of that in between middle shuttle time, so that you're just having the one earlier in the evening for people that want to leave earlier, and then you have that one at the very end of the night so that you're not stuck with 75 people trying to leave the venue and you only have room for 50, and then there's 25 people that either have to stick around and wait for that bus to go, drop off, and come back and get the rest of the people. And that might not even be an option for you, especially if your venue requires you to be out at a certain time. You want to schedule your transportation services to take care of everybody leaving the premise at that time that you need to. So there are lots of things to consider when it comes to hiring transportation for your wedding, and having a good transportation company will help you kind of work through all of these details with you and give their advice on what will work best for your current situation and how many guests you have, location, and all of that. This is also when having a wedding coordinator is super helpful, because they can help navigate through all of this with you and give you best practices and options for what the best way to kind of tackle the whole wedding transportation situation best for your wedding day. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe to get weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice, and we will see you next week.